Wheels keep turning. Good morning. It's Friday. If you just tuned in around 9 o'clock, you know it's time for Lovebabz, Lovetalk. And I'm talking today. It's a talk day. So I have Enroue Halfkenny to come back on because, baby, I've been having these conversations. I've had more conversations about faith in the last few times that you've been on than I've had in years. Like, people are moved by this conversation.
That's beautiful.
And they want to, mostly black people, they want to move, not people don't want to give up Christ, but if they do, that's fine. But they want to explore the expansion of something other that feels more authentic and connected to roots. And the piece about the ancestor resonated with so many people, Enroue. And people were like, I never thought about the ancestors. I just, and then when you talked about how we already incorporate ancestors into our practices, we pour out liquor for libations. We have a mantle full of aunties and uncles and grandparents. We remember holidays and death anniversaries. So we're already in that practice. But then somebody asked the question, how do we know which ancestors? Because, maybe some of these ancestors weren't good ancestors. Right. How do we want to be connected to the ancestors who, were harmful or questionable or trifling?
That's a good question.
Good morning.
Good morning. Happy Friday, all.
Happy Friday.
I'm very happy it's Friday. So there's a lot of complexity in that question. And actually what I hear more in that is fear. Right. And so because of those ancestors who suffered or who caused suffering, I'm not going to connect with any of them. That's typically kind of the road that goes down. Like, well, what do you mean open up to and relate and to my ancestors? Is the concern, is the kind of the worry, because there's this feeling of, if I do that, then I will be harmed. Then I open myself up to harm. Number one, that has never been my experience personally. And number two, if that is kind of a primary kind of lead concern, someone can always say, just like you get to invite who you want literally into your house, when you're sitting down to honor them, to talk to them, to work on that relationship, to get support, you can always say, I'm really trying to connect with those who can give me the love and support that I need.
So you can pick and choose the ancestors you want to deal with.
Yeah. But
like in real life.
Like in real life. And so I actually talked to my godfather about this recently, who's kind of my main teacher in Ifa. He's a traditionalist. He's an academic. He's kind of a global leader. He got invited to the Vatican among kind of world religious leaders and chanted sacred literature to the Pope for like 15 or 20 minutes. He was actually only supposed to talk for about 2 minutes, but he was like, well, I'm gonna do this because this is what needs to be done. Like, this is and so there's actually a meeting, there's a way that he's honored, and his title is actually the spokesperson for Ifa in the world. His name is Ogunwande Abimbola, and he's taught in universities all over the United States. He's a linguist. And so I was with him a couple weeks ago and asked him this question, because it's a concern that people bring to me when I talk to them about working with your ancestors and honoring them, and what healing can happen. And he actually said, well, it's actually, they don't worry about that among the Yoruba. And actually in these, and there are these annual festivals, Egungun. So Egungun is the name, Egungun is the name for ancestors. And so there are actually annual Egungun festivals that happen in communities where families will have their kind of ancestors kind of come out and display and perform and parade. And the way that looks is there are people kind of in costumes, so to speak. They're called masquerades. So you can't see them, and they go into trance and they're possessed, and they kind of embody this lineage of ancestors. And regardless of people's religious traditions, this is seen as such an important cultural aspect that everyone not only honors them, but like there's a different kind of concern, because the role that a gungun plays is also about holding the values of a community. And so when people kind of stray from that, they kind of hold people accountable for that, to bring them in. But also if people are kind of really going off, it's to name it, to face it, to confront it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was asking him this question about, like, what about people who were a mess, and like inviting them in. And he said that he's been at some of these celebrations, and like there'll be this particular masquerade embodying a particular ancestor who is a mess, who's like causing chaos and knocking over chairs and bumping into people. And his I can't remember if it was his mother or his older sister was like, oh yeah, that's how they were like in life. Just running around, causing some chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And so traditionally speaking, the community is actually strong enough to hold people. Where accountability isn't in the secrecy of one's home.
Okay.
Right? Which is very often where harm happens.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so the community, there's a different accountability, there's a different flexibility. Like, well, everyone is in it, and everyone, not just kind of everyone has a purpose, and we ignore these things, but there's a very different level of accountability where people know,
mm-hmm.
and there's less of that secrecy. And so even with that, like that's really like this stretching into this really different cultural understanding of how we're connected and what that means. Which we don't have. We were not raised in this country with that same cultural understanding.
Right.
And so that's a stretch. And that's why I go back to number 2. You can always say, I'm only trying to connect with those who can give me the love and support that I need right now.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody who's bringing something else, I just can't deal with you right now.
Yeah.
Because sometimes in our lives, like, it's not like everybody in our lives right now that we talk to are just those people who are, however we want to describe, as safe. Right. But we gauge what that relationship is. And sometimes we have a greater capacity to say, like, so there's some conflict, there's some mess between us, and you're doing this other thing and I'm doing this other thing. Let's actually engage in that and see what can change.
Mm-hmm.
And so that to me is also an important place where ancestor worship and reverence can benefit us.
Or it can't change and you just let it go.
And you let it go, exactly. But that's different than the, like, empowering the disconnection, or empowering the otherness, or empowering the distancing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so it's the same complexity as with living human beings,
mm-hmm.
as with our ancestors.
Right.
Because they were actually living human beings.
Yeah.
Right. With stories.
And their death doesn't stop whatever the mess was.
Right. Yeah, they're not
just
instantly
like
elevated to some glorious.
Right. And I think that's what people think. I think people think once you,
mm-hmm.
that when you talk about in this way,
mm-hmm.
that death somehow elevates people and removes them from whatever sin or harm, and it doesn't.
But what it also means is that, so let's say, so there are people in my lineage, in the kind of Halfkenny line, who there's some my great, can't remember right now. So a great or great one of the great greats grandfathers who was a Halfkenny was also really abusive to my family, right, to his kids and his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And so this doesn't mean that kind of that's excused, or that's all fine, but it also means that, like, wow, what do I have to do in my healing so that I'm not replicating any of those things? But it also means that I can just kind of move around him to still connect with this larger body of ancestors, mm-hmm. to give me and work with me in the ways that I need, and I can kind of deal with him in a way that I want to. Right? And I've never experienced ways that just kind of opening myself up and then just like a mess just kind of comes through, and like, oh my God, now I'm feeling all this negativity, or I'm lost in some other story. And I know people sometimes when they because everyone's different, kind of how they experience whatever their spirituality is, right? Some people it's an idea, some people it's embodied, it's in their, literally in their bodies. They feel, you know, hairs on their arms or something start moving, or they feel temperature changes. Some people literally hear or see these ancestors or spirits around them. And there's no kind of hierarchy of what's better. Just like we're all different people in the other ways that we're living, we're all different people in terms of how we experience feelings, emotion, energy, kind of however you want to frame that. And there are people who kind of experience some of this, you know, some of the confusion or some of the hurt or some of the negativity with their ancestors. But to really have people understand that they get to choose how they want to deal with that. You can say like, oh, I don't want that. This doesn't feel right. And that's actually a skill to keep developing, so that when we're walking the earth, we set those limits with people, and we listen to that sensitivity. Like something feels off. All right, I don't have to shut this down or blow it up or something, but I can take care of myself in a way. And then maybe I have to be here in an uncomfortable situation, but I learn how to take care of myself so that I'm present.
But that's a good lesson for the living.
Well, that's why, so we're living.
Right? Like that's the lesson for the living. And so it's not different when you take it to the ancestors that
this
passed.
Is about our relationship with them. And so this is also the way for me, doing ancestor work has actually been also about my own development as a living person, right? So I'm alive now. So I have some opportunities that they literally don't have. And so I get to look at all this complexity in a really different way and say like, all right, well, where am I stuck? And where do I shut myself off actually from support that's there because I'm afraid of hurt, right? That's like how trauma lives in us. We just like, everything is bad, the world is dangerous. And so we actually shut ourselves off from the places where there actually is support, and support in really simple ways and in unconditional ways. So we have connections to our ancestors who are just like, we just love you and we're here. And whenever you can reach out to us, we're here. That's been my more of my experience with them. And sometimes even before I came to this tradition, I had dreams and experiences of that. And I was like, I can't manage that. I'm trying to like get my paper done. I'm trying to like go to the cafeteria and function. And I don't know what this is. And so I had to say like, so I get it that there's some help trying to come through and it's confusing and it's actually disruptive. So like, stop and I'll come back to you. And then that's kind of what my own journey was like, all right, let me get some other things stable. And then like, oh, so what was that? What is this? What is there? How do I discover that? And it was really powerful to learn that these questions are old questions, and as earth-based African heritage people, there are present day practices that we have lost here to grow and to develop and to learn about ourselves and our connection to like the mystery and wonder and spirituality and blessings that life is.
So talk a little bit about that, like unpack a little bit of that, like some of that, because I come to this with no real understanding of any of this, except for what I've been talking with you about. And it's fascinating to me on a lot of levels. Like when you said, get outside, start. And I realized I was already doing that. Like something was already calling me to do that. Right. I felt connected to that. Right. Going to the beach every day, being in the woods and walking a trail. Right. I felt very connected to that. Right. Like it was the right thing to do.
Yeah. And so here's the thing. Like, so I've done a lot of different kinds of spiritual work and connected to nature. And there was some work that I was doing. And I also know that this isn't like exclusive to like this particular tradition. Right. Right. And there are people who are of all faiths who seek connection to God through nature. Right. And so fine. And, you know, this tradition for me does that in ways that are fulfilling across a number of ways, right? So in a personal way, this is just how it spoke to me, right? And so it's also important for me that I honor and I see like people going down different paths to like find their way, and I really honor that. And I honor that as a person, and like this tradition also honors that. The West African Orisha tradition is like, yeah, like your destiny and purpose, maybe in this practice, maybe somewhere else. Good, because like the point is actually your purpose and your destiny and the unfolding of that.
Okay.
I
like that. That's already inclusion,
right?
On a lot of levels, like so for you to be free.
Most, I don't know all of them. Most kind of indigenous traditions are like that.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to come, like we're not saying everybody has to be this, because like you're over there and that makes sense to you, and like okay, that's not us, but like fine, and that's not how. So particularly in relationship to West African Orisha tradition, that's not how Islam and Christianity deal with it. There's very much an explicit,
the way.
Yeah, and not only that this is the way, but like, and we will wreck yours.
Yeah.
And that's real. And this is happening all over the world around like kind of what colonialism is. And so things around like Christianity and Islam are aspects of them, the ways that they're institutionalized, not all of it, not people's connection to God and the divine, but ways that it's institutionalized and used for power and for control.
You're gonna go to hell.
Yeah, well,
and that's pretty.
And you've got these resources that we actually want, and so you're not a person. I mean, this was literally, the indigenous people here were not considered human beings, and so by the church in Europe, and so anything that happened to them was fine because they weren't considered human beings.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's a real thing that exists and continues today. And that caused a lot of suffering, and and it's heartbreaking. And so, for me in kind of finding this Orisha practice, there was a way that I could kind of find my way back to like, not just an idea of like what my African roots are and kind of African heritage, but like, oh, this is speaking to me in the present. This isn't about kind of going back to some idea of something. It's like, oh, this is actually how it feels. When I go, I feel differently. The energy and the feeling of the ocean feels different than the energy of the forest.
Yes.
Right? And even in the forest of this place now. So that to me is like, so there is kind of one reality, one absolute thing, but that's not necessarily something I can actually relate to and develop a relationship with and get support with, because again, it's kind of created everything. But like, wow, this river. And so in the cosmology of the Orisha tradition, gods and goddesses, Orisha, some manifest as natural forces. So you have literally sacred rivers that actually are about a specific Orisha. So like Oshun, for example, is an Orisha and is a specific river, is the Oshun River, which runs through Oshogbo in Nigeria. And there's an annual Oshun festival that people do pilgrimage to.
I did not know that.
Many people don't know that, right? Why don't people know that? Right? What is the value and strength and relevancy of African traditions? That's thrown in the closet, or that's rolled over by a tank or a bulldozer, right? It's ignored or explicitly demonized.
Mm-hmm.
Even though in this pilgrimage, there are people of so many faiths who are Yoruba people who go because they recognize there's also more flexibility. So people can really be devout Christians and be traditionalists. Like they'll go to traditional priests and priestesses for help and support to get people to come to their church or their mosque.
Wow, that's interesting.
Right? So this is the depth of where this is part of people's culture and a fundamental piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
There are also people who are devout Christian or Muslim who are like, this is the devil and we're going to wreck it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of all of that exists. But something like the Oshun Festival, people go and they honor this Orisha, this divinity, which is not an aspect of really Christianity or Islam or kind of other faiths. It's really its own thing. Oshun as a divinity has her own sacred literature, has her own kind of divine, kind of priest and priestesshood. There are songs, there's culture, there's aspects centered around this particular divinity, which is true for every divinity.
Mm-hmm. I like the fact that it's a goddess.
There are many.
I love the fact that it is female centered.
Mm-hmm.
Not to take away from men. That's not my experience of in religion, it's always been male, phallic driven.
Right. And this has these divine forces which have both. There's some that are really feminine forces, and not exclusively in like a feminine that's just nurturing in ways that we generalize what femininity means.
Right.
There's another Orisha Oya who is as a person was also a leader, and like kind of a leader in her own right. And there's the Niger River is kind of her river, but she also manifests as like a hurricane and tornado, and also as a buffalo. So these natural forces is a leader unto her own right, is a fierce warrior, is married, yet is equal on equal terms as kind of fierce people, and kind of brings change and transformation. So even as what I'm saying is like different Orisha have different aspects and components and kind of energies. And so we work with them to kind of connect with and bring those energies into our life for what we're seeking. Sometimes we want peace. Sometimes we want the strength to like cut through the nonsense and kind of plow through. Sometimes we need some tranquility. Sometimes we need creativity. Sometimes we just need to like just clear things out of the way regardless. And so we connect with different divinities, different Orisha to do that.
I like that. It's like when I'm cleaning my house, I don't use the same cleaner for everything.
No, exactly. And so that's the piece. Like our actual lives for me, has these different components and feelings and experiences. And so it's about, wow, when I really want to ground into something, I do that and I connect with that force and that practice.
I like that. So how do you learn? Where do you go to learn? Do I go into forces like the ancestors point me in the right direction? Like, is there some form of learning or not formal? I don't want to. I have to use Western language because that's all I know. So how do you step into this?
Right. So there's lots of ways. There's information on the internet. There's lots of books, but imagine. But here's the challenge of that. So imagine somebody saying, well, I really want to learn about Christianity. And let's say there were actually no institutions around, right? And say, okay, so I could just go online and like Google prayer to Jesus, and that's what's gonna do it. No. So some of it is about finding those communities, finding the people who have some knowledge. So traditionally, right, these are in a similar way that even traditional skills here were passed on in terms of apprenticeship. There's ways to like learn and train under people and with people. And those institutions have existed in this country, though they've been hidden. I mean, they've been spiritual houses in terms of how the diaspora has worked for many years. And that's how I learned. I mean, I literally apprenticed with priestesses who were a couple who had a spiritual house. It was like a community center. And I apprenticed with them for about 6 years. So I would go virtually every weekend, kind of in the kind of peak of my apprenticeship. I would show up Friday night and I would leave sometime on Sunday, and people would come through for support. People come through for readings, for consultation, just because they're struggling, or to sing and to dance, or just to hang out. Elders would come to do spiritual work with people, do spiritual readings, do ritual, do ceremony with people. And so I learned what that means, like both what literally it is, like what are the songs that are sung, what are the things that are offered, what are the ways that people are relating, as well as how do you support kind of a more traditional understanding of learning and community. Oh, here's an elder, so let me like go get some tea and like see that they're taken care of, so they can really focus on kind of the healing work. There can be challenges in terms of, because that's not a part of United States culture as much. There can be a lot of confusion around kind of power, but I want to do it the way I want to do it. I just want to kind of pick and choose. And like, it's like if you want to deepen your skill at something, you have to kind of surrender to that and not know. And then once you get some foundation, say, oh, okay, this is how it worked. There is some flexibility here. And that's really challenging for a lot of people. And just like in any spiritual and religious community, there are people who get caught up in power. There are people who have their own trauma histories. There are people who don't have a particular understanding of kind of what leadership means, or power over people and not necessarily power with. And part of that is because of the place that the Orisha tradition has played and the way that's been demonized, it's been secret, right? And so with the secrecy, it can be very hard. There's not the same kind of flexibility in terms of like sharing knowledge, right? Because what are people going to do with it? Are they really going to honor it? Or are they going to kind of take it away and kind of spin it into something else? And so there's a way that like, if something was passed on to you and you have, let's say you know this kind of particular ritual or way for like just helping people to calm down and be, I don't know, calmer in their lives, kind of cool them down. And so because there's not a lived community that's exchanging information and helping this experience, this tradition grow, people can hold on to that really tightly. And feel that like, well, if you want to know something, you have to prove to me your commitment to this tradition, and then I'll show you this thing.
Oh.
And that's kind of a part of what's happened in the diaspora because of what institutions of slavery has done, what trauma has done. Traditionally, in West Africa, in these traditions, there's such a higher level of common knowledge because it's common knowledge. These are things that people in the culture have been a part of the culture for so long that like, oh, everybody knows. It would be like, because in, let's say, church communities, people really know the Bible. So access to the Bible itself is not the thing that demonstrates connection or proficiency. Right. But if people didn't, then the knowledge of that in particular would be a symbol, right? So it's like, well, I know these verses, and if you want to like do this practice, you have to prove to me that you're really committed to this, because this is precious and it's been something that I've had to hold on to pass on. And so there can be a rigidity, not always, but there can be a rigidity in that, really as a response to oppression.
Wow. Man, this is...
Sorry.
No, man. Listen, this. I'm telling you, this takes the place of church for me. This gives me church. Gives me. I feel elevated when I have these deep conversations about because I get the sense that people in my circle, people there's something more that is wanted, right? And everybody has their own whatever that want is, right? And a lot of it is centered around spiritual holes. Right? Because, people can say, oh, you know what? My professional life is good. My love life, not so much. But my spiritual life.
So what are the holes that people are talking about? Because what are the holes that people are saying? So there's this like, I don't want to change anything, but I want to add something. So what has that been? I
think people want to change something, at least from the conversations I had. I think, like I had a conversation last night with a good sister friend. I'm not going to say her name, but she was like, I'm not, I don't feel like I'll ever be in somebody's church again. I'm churched out. But there's a desire for some kind of spiritual connection, some kind of oneness with God and sacredness and all of that. And I get that. I think I'm standing in that space too. But for me, because I came from such a great church for 20 years, that gave me everything that I wanted in a spiritual community. They were very active. They did all the things that I was interested in. And I don't know if I'll find that again. And I don't know if I want to worship with a majority of white people. I have nothing against white people, but I think there's something more that I like to do. But then maybe not. Maybe putting race on it is my way of articulating what I want in a faith community. Because I loved my faith community, and it didn't matter to me that they were a majority white. They were good people, and we did a lot of good work together. But there is this spiritual hold of connection that I'm hearing from people. I don't feel it as much as most people because I've got spiritual practices that hold me, but people who don't, if I don't go to church, what do I do? Like if I don't, it's like, okay, I could go walk and take a hike. Okay, what else? Do you know what I mean? Like what else?
Well, it gets, so this. So I work with a lot of people who are not in my tradition, because most people are not. Yeah. Though even though I say that there are communities here in New Haven there are communities kind of all over the United States and actually all over the world. I mean, this is really a world religion, or Risha practice. So that said, it is also not as publicly present or accepted or institutionalized in the ways that others Christianity is here, or other religious practices are here. So I talk to a lot of people who are not trying to come into this faith and into this lens and are seeking something. And so to them, like, so one thing that really spoke to me in general was about that experience, right? It's the value for me was my experience with the divine. It wasn't my understanding of the divine. It wasn't my thinking about the divine. It was an embodied experience. And so what that means is that goes into really mystic traditions, right? And so Christianity has mystic traditions.
Yes.
Right? Really experiential traditions. Judaism has, Islam has, almost any tradition has that. And so if people's faith is, I haven't found the church, that's a different question than a shift into West African Orisha practices or West African indigenous traditions. Ancestor reverence and worship has been a part of earth-based communities forever. And these other religions, mostly Abrahamic religions, if we talk about right now, and even some others, don't have as a part of their theology your blood ancestor worship and reverence.
Yeah.
Right. And so while I think it's important and it's just true in terms of people's experiences, like, oh, like I feel their presence, I feel this relationship with my ancestors, that actually comes from a different theological viewpoint. And so I want to give people also permission to just like, so for some, it may be finding another church, right? Maybe it's finding another church where more people are like them, however they want to frame that, racially, economically, ability, gender, whatever. And there may be something that's like, there's something here that I've never allowed in myself to feel before. And that's fundamentally questioning my faith, not just church or in church or out of church, but maybe it's not church. Maybe it's not Christianity. Maybe it's not Jesus. Maybe it's not an understanding of however that lands for people. Maybe it's not Islam, right? It's something else is calling or is waking up. And so I don't say that to like, I'm trying to get people over, but like, let yourself ask that question.
I think that's a very difficult.
It is. Yes.
I know it's difficult for Muslims because they are not even going to entertain that. I know for Christians, depending on where you shake out, because I grew up Pentecostal, but then I'm UCC, which is, the most liberal church, second to, the Quakers, the Unitarians, with the liberalness of come, everybody's welcome.
Yeah. Well, but even that though, it's still a Christian church, so it's yes, everyone's welcome. We recognize you in this lens, right? We may add some other elements, but it's still Quakers are still Christian. Yes. There's openness. They express that and connect with that in a different way, but it's very much grounded in that. And so as a practitioner, that's clear to me. It's not, oh, I could just go and like, oh, I'm gonna pray there the way I want to pray. No, and that's fine because that's not the place for it. But I think it's a different question of finding your way. Right. Oh, maybe it's not this denomination. Maybe it's another denomination. Right. And that's a different crisis to say, like, maybe it's not this theological religious practice. Maybe it's a different relationship to God, to the divine that that's happening.
I like that. I like that thought. That's a big thought. Right. And that's a hard one to tease out.
That's a shakier thought.
Yeah.
Because that causes more disruption.
Yes.
And it brings up the issue of how we see African traditions, how we see Africa, how we actually see our blackness, and what has been the cost of being here in this country.
Oh, I think it's a lot.
Right? I'm assimilated into this culture in this country, even though I have these other practices and other viewpoints.
Yes.
And so for me, like that line of like where the buy-in is, and what am I literally willing to question. And so just like we're talking about racism and white supremacy and ableism, all these things, if we don't see it, we will perpetuate it, because that is the very nature of the culture that we're in.
I was at a party last weekend, sorority sister, Ayana.
Mm-hmm.
At her party, fly party. So many Africans were there, Africans, Nigerians, Ghanaians, all these kinds of folks. And I'm talking to the Nigerian folks, and they have a whole different take on Black people in America. I'm thinking we're all just Black people. We're gonna be, and they see us as very, very different than them.
We're Americans.
They see us as Americans. Mm-hmm. And it's stunning to me because I look like them. I don't look like other people. I look like you. Mm-hmm. And so I'm talking to this brother, and he's like, yeah, Americans. And I'm like, brother, I'm Black. And he's like, yeah. And then he starts to go in about how he is learning about Black history and Blacks in this country, because his understanding and some of his friends was like, Black people over here got it good. Or have it good, or had it good for a long time, or having it good. Right. And he's like, well, he didn't realize that until he was here, and he was like, oh,
it's different, right? Because they're sold a version,
yes,
of what life is here,
yes,
right?
Yes, and
they've had their own, what colonialism has done there,
yes,
also, right? And not all, just like not all anybody's anything, right? So not all people from Africa are traditionalists,
mm-hmm.
right? And so there's these are the cultural differences, because people grow up in different cultures in different places, and I think that's part of that's where it becomes glaring. Like, oh, right, I'm of this culture here, and I can push against it, and I can grow, and I can heal, and I can develop, and like I've internalized things which I don't even know until I go somewhere else or meet with someone who's like, there are other ways of thinking.
Yeah.
There are other ways of being.
Yeah.
And so that question of like, what's happening with my faith is wrapped up in that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is wrapped up in what I've been kind of acculturated to. And part of that acculturation is actually to fundamentally doubt your actual connection to the divine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And that was done and has been done for specific reasons, and particularly, what are the outlets that people here, what are the outlets of African people here who were enslaved had, right, as a way to practice the divine,
mm-hmm.
got really narrow, right? What were the outlets to have access to anything, right? Get narrowed. Also, there's words in this reading. How did so many people learn how to read the Bible? And so you're internalizing certain messages about relationships to the divine and relationships to community, relationships to power through a particular theological lens. Now, there's tons of things around liberation, this whole liberation theologies and ways that, the Exodus out of Egypt has also, and, Harriet Tubman being called Moses is fundamental to that in terms of like, how do we get our liberation?
Yeah.
And it's still grounded in a theology that has been actively used to oppress and destroy Earth-based and African people.
And
and it's hard for I think it's really hard for Black people in this country who are Christian to wrestle with that.
Yeah.
Right? What are the ways that this practice is actually continues to be a privilege, right? So it's like wealthy Black people have economic privilege over poor Black people. That's a real thing. It's not an idea, right? Black people in this country who are Christians have, I don't even know what kind of, how religious, theological, institutional privilege over those who don't have that, right? So as an indigenous African practitioner, right, I hit barriers that other people don't hit because of their religious acceptance and access and integration into Christianity.
Mm-hmm. I think
that's real.
Yeah, that's real.
And it's a hard thing to hold. Oh, these are the ways that this belief system, right, which is, I don't question like people's authentic connection to God and their understanding of God, and they're connected to systems of oppression in that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a real struggle. That's a real struggle.
That is a real struggle. But here's the other part of that though. because we have in this country been able to sort of take whatever is given to us and make it our own. So I think people feel this way. I mean, I think religion is a good example.
Yeah.
You know, Christianity was used to sort of harm us and coerce us and demonize us. And we took that that understanding, and we took that language and message, and we turned it around so that it could serve us. Right? And we did it without trying to figure out how to connect back to wherever we are, because we're all sort of disconnected because of, you know, the institution of slavery. But I think now people are starting to wrestle with it. I'm seeing more and more people trying to wrestle with that part of history in their religious beliefs. It's hard to sit and it's hard to sit with that now. Everybody's trying to feel like there's got to be something else there's some other piece here that I need to know or learn or explore, so that I don't feel so separate, right? Or so, there's a separateness that happens with Black people here. I guess Black people just about anywhere, but
there's a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
So if we look at this lens of, and any generalization like this, I mean, these are kind of simplistic understandings in a certain way, because like it's different in people, right? In particular people, and people find their ways. But even if you look at like, so Christianity kind of lands on us, and we, since we're people, right, we want to be connected to meaning still, and spirit and God in ways that we can, and that's real. We kind of find, we find our way, and like, so this is how it can speak to me. This is how I can pull sustenance and meaning and being a person particularly within a system that's dehumanizing me. And so there's beauty and there's strength and there's resilience in that, which you know, for me, there's not a denial of that. And for me, it was there's more. Like, for people who are here, there was no more. There was like, these are the options. You know, it's like you die, you feel isolated and alone because you don't have a connection to God, which you also feel is real. Yeah. And this is the language that I'm given. So it's either that or almost nothing in terms of what's supported and allows you to live. Right? And so if we look at that in terms of like a traumatic relationship, you know, it's domestic violence, right? You do it this way or you get harmed. So people do it that way. And then they learn that like, oh, I need to do it this way. This is actually what helps me to survive. And I cling to that and I learn it. And there's some beauty and strength in that. And there's some distorted thinking in that. Yeah. And then once someone is free from that relationship or freer from that relationship, those patterns are still there. And it's hard to then say, oh, maybe there is more. Maybe there is something else that's calling to me. And again, this isn't like an intellectual kind of venture for me. But when I hear people, something is stirring in them. Yes. That's actually their health and their resiliency, saying maybe you have a capacity now that you did not have before. And maybe there's actually more space now than there was before. There's still oppression. There's still these things happening, right? But it may not be so close. And so that's part of our healing and the healing journey to like, maybe I can be more. Maybe I can find more. And wow, I only had this language and this language isn't fully speaking to me. So maybe I need to learn this other language. And that's hard. And it doesn't mean that everything that came before is bad or wrong. It's maybe something else is speaking to me now. Yeah. And
I like that you said the capacity.
Yeah.
Because to me, capacity sounds like expansion, right? Like listen, you can, it's like life is like a buffet. You could just, you know, take what you need, get what you can. And move on down the table as you feel the need to move down the table. So I like capacity. Yeah. Yeah. I think I know in my circle something is calling people. Yeah. And I think people, I always believe that God is always speaking. God is always speaking. We're not always listening. Sometimes we're tuned out. But God is always speaking. My church says God is still speaking, and I say that too. But I say God is always speaking, and when we're still enough and we slow down, we could hear it. Right.
So that's the invitation, I think, without jumping into what are all the wherefores, what does this traditional technology mean? It's encouraging people to slow down. So slow down and like deepen your listening to your ancestors.
Yes.
From your heart. What do I need? What am I yearning for? What help do I need? I don't even know what to ask. So let me even just pray for that. Help me to know what I'm lurking for.
Help me to know what I want, what I need.
Right?
Sit
in
still.
These places, listen differently to what that yearning is. That's a part of this. So yeah, there are things to do, but that's really a beginning.
Yes.
And honor that. Honor the fullness of where you come from. Because this is our opportunity now as living human beings. So to me, like, okay, let's see what this is about. Where's my capacity? It might be greater than I think it is. What do I need to do to grow into that? Maybe there's more possibility. And then if I hit a no, if I run up against something, if I come at that place from this increased capacity, there's more opportunity to deal with it differently versus coming to that no from the place of smallness and fear. And this is the long game, right? This is about life. This isn't about like, let me have this kind of experience. Experiences can be transformative.
This ain't
but
fast
this is about
food.
a practice. This is
this is not a drive-through. Like this requires the setting of the table, and the sitting down
and thinking and feeling differently.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm happy to, if people have questions that they want to email me or text me or whatever.
When we post this up, make sure you put your email in the body of in the comment so people can find you, so they can stop calling me.
Healing and Liberation Counseling.
Healing and Liberation Counseling.
That's my practice, and healingandliberation.com is the website.
I like this. This is good. Yeah. Oh, he'll be back, people. Don't listen.
We'll keep
Trust me. We're going to keep this going because people are texting me like, well, this is good. This is good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Enroue.
Thanks, Babz.
You make my life
Happy
better
Friday.
when I have these conversations. Happy Friday. Thank you, Harry Charles. I'm about to play us out. And then we're going to go take pictures.
Mm-hmm.